Ethan Carter dropped to his knees on that spotless hangar floor, pressed his bare palm flat against the cold concrete, and closed his eyes right there in front of 40 of the highest-paid engineers in America. Victoria Langford laughed out loud. "You think those circles fix engines?" Every suit in the room laughed with her. But here's what none of them knew: the man on his knees in dirty work boots had once designed engines that flew. And the reason their $40 million prototype wouldn't start wasn't a mystery. It was a crime. And in 7 minutes, he was about to prove it. Before we go further, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe respect should be earned, not handed to the loudest person in the room, subscribe and ride with me to the end. The alarm on Ethan Carter's cracked phone went off at 4:30 in the morning, and he silenced it before the second buzz so it wouldn't wake his daughter. He lay in the dark for a moment, doing the math he did every single morning. $42 in the checking account. Rent due in 9 days. Lily's field trip permission slip stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet, $12 due Friday, and he hadn't signed it yet because he didn't know if he'd have the $12 by Friday. He got up. In the kitchen, he made 2 lunches, one for her, one for him, out of the same loaf of bread, and he gave her the 2 slices from the middle, because the ends had gone a little hard, and she was 8 years old and deserved the soft parts. "Dad!" Lily appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, hair a disaster, eyes half open. "Are you working the big place today? The car place?" "Langford Motors," Ethan said. "Fixing a floor." "Is it a fancy floor?" He smiled. "The fanciest floor you ever saw. You could eat off it." "Would you, though?" "I would not," he admitted, and she laughed. And that laugh was the only paycheck that had ever really mattered to him. He dropped her at her grandmother's before 6. His mother-in-law, his late wife's mother, Rosa, who had stayed in his life long after the funeral because she loved that little girl as much as he did, met them at the door in her robe. "You look tired, mijo," Rosa said, taking Lily's backpack. "I'm always tired, Rosa. That's just my face now." "Your face was handsome once." "Once." He agreed and kissed his daughter's head. "Be good. I'll pick you up at 6. "Bring me the fancy floor," Lily called after him. "I'll bring you a photo of the fancy floor." He drove his 16-year-old truck across town as the sun came up, and he did not think about the fact that 10 years ago he had driven a very different car to a very different job, one with his name on the office door and a title that meant something. He had trained himself not to think about that. Thinking about it didn't put bread on the table. Thinking about it just hurt. Langford Motors sat behind a security gate the size of a small country. Ethan gave his name to the guard, showed his contractor paperwork, and was waved through toward a building the guard called the hangar. He didn't know why they called it that until he walked inside and understood it was big enough to build airplanes in. And in the center of that vast gleaming space, under a rack of lights bright enough to perform surgery, sat the reason everyone in the building looked like they hadn't slept: the engine. Ethan didn't know what it was yet. He just knew it was covered in a fitted cloth, like a body at a morgue, and there were maybe 40 people orbiting it, and every single one of them was tense enough to snap. A man with a clipboard and a lanyard found him. "You the floor guy?" "Ethan Carter." "Hear about the expansion joints, the cracks by the East Bay?" "Somebody said they were catching a pallet jack." "Yeah, fine, whatever. Just..." The man glanced over his shoulder at the covered engine. "Stay out of the way. We've got a situation." "Understood." "You don't touch anything. You don't talk to anyone. You fix your cracks and you're a ghost. Clear." "Crystal," Ethan said, and he meant it. He'd been treated like a ghost on 100 job sites. He knew how to disappear. It was almost restful. He got his knee pads, his crack chaser, his tubes of epoxy, and his little bucket of tools, and he went to the East Bay, and he got to work on his knees, and for about 40 minutes nobody bothered him. But a man on his knees, quiet and visible, hears everything. He heard the engineers first. "Reset the whole ECU array, and it still won't turn over. No fault codes. That's the insane part. The diagnostics say everything's fine." It's not fine. Kessler, it's a paperweight. Wow. If we don't have this thing running by 10 o'clock, we are finished. Do you understand me? Chen is bringing the Pinnacle people at 10. Pinnacle. They fly out at noon. If they see a dead engine, we don't get the money. And if we don't get the money, I know what happens if we don't get the money. Ethan kept chasing his crack, but something in the back of his brain, some old muscle he thought had died, twitched. No fault codes. He turned that phrase over. An engine that won't start but throws no codes. That's not a broken engine. A broken engine tells you it's broken. That's the whole point of the diagnostic system. An engine that stays silent while it fails you isn't broken. It's lying. Or somebody's making it lie. He put the thought away. Not his problem. Not his floor. He had cracks to fill. Then she walked in. He heard her before he saw her. Heard the way the room changed, the way 40 conversations dropped to a hush, the way even the air seemed to stand up straighter. Heels on concrete, sharp and fast and furious. Somebody tell me it's running. Victoria Langford's voice cut across the entire hangar. Somebody in this room tell me right now that it is running. Silence. Kessler. A pause, then quietly. It's not running, Miss Langford. It's not. She stopped. Ethan, 40 feet away, and on his knees, heard her take a breath, the kind of breath a person takes when they are choosing between screaming and not screaming. We have $140 million walking through that door in 3 hours. My father built this company for 30 years, and I have been running it for 11 months. And you are telling me the engine I promised the entire investment world, the engine that is supposed to save us, is a dead lump of metal, and nobody knows why. The diagnostics. I don't care about the diagnostics. The diagnostics work. The engine doesn't fix it. We've tried everything. Try harder. Ethan filled another crack. He did not look up. He had learned a long time ago that a man in his position did not look up at moments like these. Nothing good happened when you looked up. But then a young engineer, one of the panicking ones, a kid really no older than 26, said the thing that changed the whole morning. Miss Langford, with respect, we've had our best people on this for 6 hours. If we can't find it, nobody's finding it in 3 hours. Maybe we call Pinnacle and push the meeting. We don't push the meeting, Victoria said. You push the meeting, you tell $140 million, we're not ready. And that money never comes back. That money finds somebody else. Do you understand? There is no pushing the meeting. There is only the engine running or this company being over. And that word over was when Ethan Carter made his mistake. He looked up. He didn't mean to say anything. He swears later to himself that he didn't mean to. But there is a thing that happens to a man who used to be good at something, a real thing, when he watches people flail at a problem he can see. It's physical. It's like watching someone try to open a door by pushing when the sign clearly says pull. It's not the engine, Ethan said. He said it quietly. He said it almost to himself. But the hangar had gone silent for Victoria's speech, and quiet words carry in silent rooms, and 40 heads turned toward the man in the dirty boots, kneeling in the corner with epoxy on his hands. Victoria Langford turned last. She looked at him the way you look at a stain. I'm sorry. Did the floor just talk? A couple of the engineers laughed. Nervous laughter, but laughter. Ethan should have gone back to his crack. Every instinct he'd built over 10 hard years told him to go back to his crack. Instead, he stood up slow, his knees popping, and he wiped his hands on his jeans. You've got a system that says nothing's wrong, he said, and a machine that won't run. That's not a failure. A failure leaves a trail. This left nothing. Which means something's sitting between your sensors and your controller, keeping them from talking. Your diagnostics say no fault, because as far as they can tell, there is no fault. They're not being fooled. They're being blindfolded. For a second, just a second, nobody laughed. Then Victoria did. It started as a scoff and became a real laugh, sharp and disbelieving, and it echoed in that enormous room, and one by one the engineers picked it up because their boss was laughing, and it is always safe to laugh when the boss is laughing. Blindfolded, Victoria repeated. The sensors are blindfolded. That's your professional diagnosis. From the floor. She shook her head. Kessler, who led a maintenance contractor into a $140 million project. He was here for the cracks. The cracks. She turned back to Ethan, and now her eyes were doing something worse than laughing. They were dismissing him, filing him, deciding exactly how much of a person he was, and finding the number very small. Let me guess, you watched a video. You've got a cousin who's good with cars. You once fixed a lawnmower, and it made you feel like Einstein. No, ma'am. Then what are you? And Ethan Carter stood in the middle of the best engineers money could buy, with $140 million balanced on the edge of a knife, and he did the thing he had promised himself for 10 years he would never do again because it hurt too much, because it was a door to a room he'd nailed shut. He almost told her. He almost said, I have a master's degree in mechanical engineering. I spent 9 years designing propulsion systems for aircraft. I have my name on 4 patents. I know more about what's happening inside that machine than everyone in this room combined, and the only reason I'm on my knees fixing your floor is that life took everything from me one piece at a time until this was what was left. He almost said all of it. Instead he said, I'm a guy who can hear it. Victoria blinked. You can hear it. Concrete carries vibration. I've been kneeling on this floor for 40 minutes. Every machine in this building has a voice. The compressor's the HVAC. The lift in the West Bay, I can feel all of it through the ground. And I can feel your engine. He nodded toward the covered shape. When you tried to start it about 20 minutes ago, and again 10 minutes ago, it wasn't dead. Dead is nothing. This wasn't nothing. It turned. It tried. The starter engaged, the block moved, and then something told it to stop before it caught. That's not a machine that's broken. That's a machine that's being held back. The laughter had stopped again. This time it didn't come back. Because the young engineer, the kid Danny, 26 years old, said very slowly, He's right about the timing. We tried to start it at 9:02 and again at 9:13. Anyone could, Victoria started. He said 20 minutes ago and 10 minutes ago, Danny said. That's exactly right, and nobody told him. Victoria's jaw tightened. So he was watching. His back's been to us the whole time, Danny said. He's been facing the wall. You could feel the room recalculating. Victoria Langford did not like being recalculated. She was young to run a company this size, 31, and she'd inherited the chair when her father's heart gave out, and every day since had been a war to prove she deserved it. To the board, to the press, to the men twice her age who called her the daughter behind her back. She had built a wall around herself made entirely of certainty, because certainty was the only thing that kept the wolves from smelling fear. And now there was a janitor putting cracks in the wall. All right, she said, and her voice had gone cold and precise. Here's what we're going to do. Kessler, take your team back to the diagnostic array. Run it again. And you, she pointed at Ethan, you go back to your floor, and if I hear one more word about hearing and blindfolds and voices, I will have you escorted off this property, and I will make sure you never bid on another job in this city. Are we clear? The room held its breath. And Ethan Carter, who needed this paycheck, who had $42 in his account, who had a field trip slip on his refrigerator. He couldn't sign, who could not afford to lose this or any job. Looked at that engine. He looked at it the way a doctor looks at a patient everyone else has given up on. And he thought about his daughter, asking him to bring home a photo of the fancy floor. And he thought about the man, he used to be the one who was good at exactly this, the one he'd buried alive to survive. And something in him, call it pride, call it stubbornness, call it the last ember of the person he'd been refused to die quietly. Give me 7 minutes, Ethan said. Victoria stared at him. Excuse me, 7 minutes. You've got 3 hours. If I'm wrong, you've lost 7 minutes, and I'll walk off this property myself, and you'll never see me again. But if I'm right, he let it hang. Then in 7 minutes, I fixed the thing 40 engineers couldn't fix in 6 hours, and you'll want to know how. That's insane. Probably. You want me to let a floor contractor put his hands on a $140 million prototype. I want you to let a man who knows put his hands on a machine that's trying to tell you something you're not listening to. She should have said no. Everything about running a company like Langford Motors screamed say no. Liability, insanity, the optics. If word got out that she'd let a maintenance man touch the engine, she'd be the punchline in every trade magazine for a year. But she was also 31 years old, with $140 million walking through the door in less than 3 hours and an engine that would not start. And her father's face was in her head. Her father, who used to say, the smartest guy in the room is almost never the guy who talks the most. And she looked at this contractor with his dirty boots and his steady eyes and his absolutely insane confidence. And some gambler's instinct. She got from her old man, reached up through all that certainty and said, "What have you got to lose that you haven't already lost?" 7 minutes, Victoria said. The room gasped. "Miss Langford." Kessler started. 7 minutes, she repeated louder and pointed at the clock on the wall. "It's 9:31. At 9:38, if this engine is not running, you are gone. Mr. What's your name?" "Carter. Ethan Carter." "You're gone. Mr. Carter and I am pressing charges if you scratch a single bolt. Do you accept those terms?" Ethan was already walking toward the engine. "Somebody get that cloth off it," he said. "And somebody get me a flashlight and a set of hex keys, and—" He stopped, turned, looked at the young engineer. "Danny, right?" The kid startled. "Yeah, how'd you—" "You're the only one who was listening. Stand next to me. I'm going to need somebody who was listening." They pulled the cloth off, and Ethan Carter saw the engine for the first time, and for one terrible private second, the whole world stopped. Because he knew this engine. Not this exact one, but the architecture, the bones of it, the philosophy underneath it, the way the intake was routed, the packaging of the control systems, the elegant, aggressive efficiency of the whole thing. He knew this because it was built on ideas he had helped pioneer a decade ago in a different life at a company that had once been the future before the future moved on without him. Whoever designed this engine had read his old papers, had stood on the work he'd done before everything fell apart. And for a second, Ethan Carter, $42 in the bank, epoxy on his hands, wanted to laugh and wanted to cry, and wanted to sit down on that beautiful floor and just feel it, all of it. The enormous, cruel joke of a life that had taken him from this to cracks in a floor. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, Victoria called out. And then he shut all of it in a box. The same box he'd been shutting things in for 10 years, and he went to work. His hands moved on their own. 10 years of forgetting, and his hands remembered everything. He didn't reach for the diagnostic tablet Danny offered him. He didn't look at a single readout. He put one hand flat on the engine block, the way he'd put his palm on the floor, and he closed his eyes, and he listened to the metal, the way other men listen to music. "Start it," he said. "What?" "Try to start it. I need to feel it fail." Danny looked at Victoria. Victoria, arms crossed, jaw set, nodded once. The starter engaged. The engine turned. Ethan felt it roll through his palm, felt the pistons rise and fall, felt the exact millisecond where it should have caught and roared to life, and felt instead the tiny wrong little hiccup. A stutter. A hesitation that had no business being there. A gap in the conversation between the machine's brain and the machine's body right at the moment it mattered most. His eyes snapped open. "There," he said. "It is not in the engine, it's in the harness. Something's on the CAN bus." He was already moving, running his hand along the wiring like a man reading Braille, following a path only he could see. "Your controller sends the signal to fire, and something in here is catching that signal and swallowing it. Just at startup. Just for a fraction of a second. Long enough to kill the launch. Then it goes quiet and reports nothing because it's not designed to break anything, it's designed to hide." "That's not possible," Kessler said. "We inspected the harness. You inspected it for damage," Ethan said, not looking up, both hands deep in the wiring now. "You were looking for something broken. This isn't broken. This is added. There's a difference. You don't find a thief by checking if the locks are broken. You find a thief by counting what's there that shouldn't be. 5 minutes, Victoria said, but her voice had changed. The mockery was gone. Something else had taken its place. She had uncrossed her arms and stepped closer, and she was watching this man's hands move through her impossible engine with a growing cold, terrible feeling in her stomach. The feeling of a person who is starting to understand that the joke might be on her. "Danny," Ethan said. "The original wiring schematic. Not the one on the tablet, the signed one from the design team. You have it." Yeah, it's in the..." Danny sprinted for a rolling cabinet, came back with a thick binder. "Open to the harness section. Read me the components on the startup control line. Every single one, in order," Danny read. Ethan followed with his fingers part by part, matching the diagram to the metal, and the whole room watched a maintenance contractor audit their prototype against its own blueprints, and 40 of the best-paid engineers in America said absolutely nothing, because for the first time in 6 hours, somebody in the room actually seemed to know what they were doing. "Relay," Danny read. "Junction. Sensor lead. Relay. Junction." "Stop." Ethan's hand had gone still. "Say that again. Relay junction, sensor lead, relay junction. How many relays on that line, on the diagram? Count them." Danny counted. 4. Ethan pulled his hand out of the harness. In his fingers, held up to the surgical light, was a small black module, no bigger than a matchbox, still trailing 2 hair-thin wires that somebody had spliced into the startup control line with a care and precision that had nothing to do with sloppiness and everything to do with hiding. "Then somebody," Ethan said quietly, "want to tell me why there are 5? The hangar went so silent, Ethan could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Victoria Langford stared at the little black box in the contractor's dirty hand. Her mind was moving very fast now, faster than it had all morning, and it was arriving at places she did not want to go, because a broken engine was a disaster. But a sabotaged engine, an engine with a 5th relay that appeared on no blueprint, spliced in by expert hands, designed to stay silent, designed to hide. That wasn't a disaster. That was a someone. That was someone inside her company. Someone with access. Someone with skill. Someone who knew exactly when the money was coming and exactly how to make the engine fail without leaving a trace. "Mr. Carter," Victoria said, and her voice was very quiet now, and very steady, and completely different from every word she'd said to him all morning. "How long does it take to install something like that?" Ethan turned the little box over in his fingers. "Not long," he said. 10-15 minutes, but you don't do it fast." He looked up at her. "You don't splice something this clean in a hurry. Whoever did this took their time. Whoever did this wasn't afraid of getting caught." He set the module down on the workbench gently like evidence. "Whoever did this had all the time in the world, because whoever did this belonged here." The clock on the wall read 9:36. He had 1 minute left, and he no longer needed it. "Danny," Ethan said, "reconnect the startup line without the 5th relay. Bridge it clean exactly like the master schematic. Then start it." Danny's hands were shaking as he worked, but he worked fast, and 40 seconds later, he stepped back, and he looked at Ethan, and Ethan nodded, and Danny reached for the starter. And Victoria Langford, who had laughed at 3 chalk circles, who had called this man a floor, who had threatened to have him thrown off her property, and charged with a crime, found that she was holding her breath, along with everyone else in that enormous room, praying to a God she didn't talk to much anymore, that the janitor was right. Danny hit the starter. The engine caught on the first turn. It didn't stutter. It didn't hesitate. It roared to life, deep and clean and furious, a sound like the future arriving. And it filled the hangar and rattled the light rack, and rolled through the concrete floor, and up through the boots and the heels and the polished shoes of every single person standing there, and Ethan Carter felt it come up through the soles of his feet. This thing he'd built the ideas for a lifetime ago. This thing everyone said couldn't be fixed, running strong and true, because he had listened when nobody else would. He didn't smile. Because he was already looking at that little black box on the workbench, and he was already understanding what Victoria was only starting to understand, and it turned everything cold inside him. The engine hadn't been designed to fail today. Today, it would have just embarrassed them. A dead engine in front of investors, bad but survivable. You reschedule. You apologize. You live. No. Whoever built that little box was smarter than that. They'd designed it to let the engine start eventually, maybe today, maybe with enough resets, to let the investors see it run, to let the money come in. And then later, under real load, under pressure, in front of the whole world, during the high-stakes testing that came after the funding closed, then it would have killed the engine for real. Catastrophically. Permanently. In a way that couldn't be hidden or fixed or explained away. They didn't want Langford Motors to fail this morning. They wanted it to fail big and public and forever with $140 million of other people's money already burned. They wanted the kind of failure a company never comes back from. Ethan Carter looked up from the little black box, and he found Victoria Langford already staring at him, and he saw in her face that she'd arrived at the same place he had. The engine roared behind them. Nobody was celebrating. "Miss Langford," Ethan said quietly, under the noise, so only she could hear. "You don't have an engine problem." He picked up the fifth relay and held it in the light between them. "You have a traitor, and they're still in this building." The engine kept roaring, and for a long moment, nobody moved to shut it off, because the sound of it was the sound of 40 jobs saved, and a company pulled back from the edge, and part of everyone wanted to just stand there and let it wash over them. But Victoria Langford was not standing in the sound. She was standing in the sentence Ethan Carter had just put in her ear. "You have a traitor, and they're still in this building." "Kill it," she said. Nobody moved. "Kill the engine," she said again louder, and Danny lunged for the cutoff, and the roar died down into a ticking, cooling silence that was somehow worse than the noise. Now the whole hangar could hear itself think, and what it was thinking was that a maintenance contractor had just pulled a black box out of the wiring, and that box had a name attached to it, and that name belonged to somebody standing in this room. Victoria turned in a slow circle. 9:37 in the morning, and she looked at every face she paid a salary to. Kessler, her chief engineer gray at the temples, sweat on his collar. The two systems leads. The controls team. The kid Danny, who was staring at the black box like it was a live scorpion. 23 years old and already smarter than half the men above him, and the only one who'd been listening. "Everybody stays," Victoria said. "Miss Langford?" Kessler started. "We have Pinnacle arriving in 23 minutes. We need to prep the demonstration. We can't just, everybody stays, buddy. You can't hold a room of engineers hostage over some." Kessler's eyes cut to Ethan, and the contempt came back into them like water finding a crack. Some janitor's conspiracy theory. He found a spare part. Maybe it was a redundancy nobody logged. Maybe it was a supplier substitution. You're about to blow up the biggest deal in this company's history because a floor guy watched too many crime shows. And there it was. Ethan almost admired it, the speed of it, the way the man reached for janitor, like a weapon he kept in his pocket. He'd heard that word aimed at him 100 times on 100 sites, and it had stopped drawing blood years ago. But something in the way Kessler said it, something too fast, too ready, made Ethan look at him a half-second longer than he'd looked at anyone else in the room. "A redundancy," Ethan repeated. "That's right. Spliced into the startup control line. On the CAN bus. Trailing two hand-soldered leads that don't appear on the master schematic your own team signed." Ethan set the box down on the workbench gently, the way you set down evidence you don't want to be accused of planting. "You want to call that a redundancy, Mr. Kessler, that's your right. But I'd think real hard about wanting your name anywhere near the word redundancy on this particular part. Because when the people who investigate this thing ask who signed off on the harness, and who inspected it, and who told the CEO it was fine 6 hours ago, that's going to be a bad day for whoever answers." Kessler's face did something complicated. The color went out of it, and then came back too strong. "Are you accusing me?" "I'm telling you what's on the box." Ethan shrugged. "You're the one hearing an accusation." 9:38. The clock crossed the line. Ethan's 7 minutes were up. The engine had run, and nobody in the room was thinking about the clock anymore. Victoria stepped between the two men, and when she spoke, her voice had gone very flat and very cold. The voice of a woman who had spent 11 months learning to run a company full of people who didn't want her there. Kessler, 2 minutes ago you told me this engine could not be fixed. You said your best people had been on it for 6 hours and nobody was finding it in 3. You said push the meeting, and then a man off my floor found it in 7 minutes. She let that hang. So forgive me if I'm not real interested in your opinion right now about what is and isn't a conspiracy theory. The room made a sound, not a laugh, a kind of collective intake of breath, because the CEO had just chosen in front of everyone, and she had not chosen her chief engineer. Kessler's jaw worked. I've given this company 19 years. Then help me protect it, Victoria said. Sit down. Everybody sit down. Nobody leaves this hangar. Nobody makes a call. Nobody sends a text until I understand what just happened to my engine. 20 engineers looked at each other, and slowly, one by one, they sat down on the workbenches and the equipment cases and the edge of the platform. 20 of the highest-paid minds in American engineering taking orders from a 31-year-old woman, because for the first time all morning, she sounded exactly like her father. All except one. Ethan caught it out of the corner of his eye. A man near the back, one of the controls team, mid-40s, glasses, a lanyard turned backward so you couldn't read the name. While everyone else was sitting, that man was moving, quietly, toward the side door. Not fast enough to draw attention. Just steady, just leaving. Hey, Ethan said. The man kept walking. Hey, you, backward badge. The man reached for the door handle. Miss Langford, Ethan said and pointed. That one's leaving. Every head turned. The man at the door froze with his hand on the handle, and for one terrible second the whole hangar looked at him, and he looked back, and you could see him calculating whether to run. Ferris, Kessler said, frowning. Where are you going? Bathroom, the man said. That's all. I need the bathroom. You can hold it, Victoria said. I have a condition. Then you'll have an accident because you are not leaving this room. She walked toward him slowly. Sit down, Mr. Ferris. And here is the thing about a lie under pressure. It's fine as long as nobody's really looking. But 20 engineers and a CEO and a maintenance contractor were now all looking directly at Ferris, and the man cracked in the way people crack when they realize the room already knows. His eyes went to the black box on the workbench, just for an instant, just a flick. But Ethan saw it, and Victoria saw Ethan see it, and Ferris saw them both see him see it. He ran. He yanked the door and bolted, and the hangar exploded into noise chairs, scraping voices shouting, and Danny, of all people. Skinny 23-year-old Danny was the closest, and dove and caught a fistful of the man's jacket, and the two of them went down hard onto the fanciest floor. Ethan had ever seen the floor he'd been hired to fix, and slid across it in a tangle of limbs and lanyards. Security! Victoria was already shouting into the phone on the wall. Security to the main hangar! Now we have a man trying to leave. Hold him at every exit. Nobody in or out. Ferris was thrashing, and Danny was hanging on for dear life, and 2 more engineers piled on, and Ethan just stood there and watched a company catch its own thief on the floor he'd come to repair. 9:41. They hauled Ferris up. He'd stopped fighting. He was breathing hard, glasses knocked crooked, and he had the specific gray look of a man who has just understood that the worst day of his life is not going to get better. You, Victoria said, walking up to him slow. You did this. Ferris said nothing. 19 months you've worked here. I signed your Christmas bonus. I approved your daughter's medical leave last spring. Do you remember that? You came to my office and you cried, and I approved it in 10 minutes. Her voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with a fury so pure it had gone quiet. And you put a bomb in my engine. It's not a bomb, Ferris said. It was the wrong thing to say, and he knew it the second it left his mouth. So you do know what it is. Silence. You know exactly what it is because you built it. Victoria was inches from him now. Who paid you? Nothing. Who paid you? And Ferris, cornered, terrified, did the thing that cornered people do. He looked for someone to share the fall with. His eyes went across the room, searching landing on face after face, and Ethan watched the man's gaze travel and watched it stop. It stopped on Kessler, Sandal, for half a second. No more. Then it jumped away deliberately too fast, the way you look away from the thing you're not supposed to be looking at. But everyone had followed his eyes. Everyone had seen where they landed first. Kessler went white. "Don't," Kessler said. "Don't you dare, Ferris. I don't know what he's playing at, Miss Langford, but I have never—" "He looked at you," Danny said, still holding one of Ferris's arms. "He looked right at you. He looked at the whole room. He looked at you first." 9:42. And Victoria Langford stood in the middle of her hangar with $140 million arriving in 18 minutes, a saboteur in handcuffs that hadn't arrived yet, and a chief engineer whose name a traitor had just flinched toward, and she had absolutely no idea who in this room she could trust. Except one person. She turned and found him. Ethan Carter, standing quietly by the workbench, hands in his pockets, watching all of it with the calm of a man who had already seen the worst life had to offer and knew this wasn't it. "You," she said. "Carter, come here." He came. "I need to know what I'm dealing with before those people walk through that door," she said low, just to him. "I need to know if this engine is safe to run in front of investors. I need to know if there's another one of those boxes somewhere I can't see. I need to know if this whole thing is a trap that's going to blow up in my face at the worst possible moment. And I need somebody to tell me the truth, and right now, the only person in this building I believe is the man I hired to fix my floor." She swallowed. "So, is it safe?" Ethan looked at the engine. He looked at the little black box. He looked at Ferris Gray and sweating in the grip of two engineers, and at Kessler too, still too controlled a man working very hard to look like a man with nothing to hide. "No," Ethan said. Victoria closed her eyes. "Not yet," he added. "But it can be. Give me the engine, and give me Danny, and give me 20 minutes, and keep everybody else away from it, especially him." He tipped his head at Kessler. "And it can be. We don't have 20 minutes, we have 18. Then get me those investors a cup of coffee and buy me two." Despite everything, despite the day falling apart around her, Victoria Langford almost laughed. Almost. "You're telling me to stall Pinnacle Capital. I'm telling you a good host makes people comfortable before the show. Offer them a tour. Offer them the good coffee. People with $140 million love to be made to feel important. You know that better than I do." She looked at him for a long moment. This contractor who had walked into her worst morning and started running it better than she was. "Who are you?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I told you. I'm a guy who can hear it." He was already rolling up his sleeves. "Danny, get the harness diagram back. We're going to walk every single line on this engine one at a time, and we're going to count every part, and if there's a sixth box or a seventh box, we're going to find it before that door opens. Move." And then the side door opened, and it wasn't Pinnacle, and it wasn't security. It was a woman in a charcoal suit that cost more than Ethan's truck holding a tablet, with the specific bright hard smile of somebody whose whole job is to smooth things over. "Victoria," the woman called out. "There you are. I've been calling. The Pinnacle team landed early. They're at the front gate. I told them 15 minutes. But honestly, they seem eager as everything." She stopped. She took in the room. The engineers sitting on equipment cases. Ferris held between two men. The black box on the workbench. The contractor with his sleeves rolled up. Her smile flickered. "Is everything okay?" Victoria stared at her. "Delia," she said slowly. "How did you know the engine was down?" The woman's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. "What I didn't. I don't. What are you talking about? The engine's fine, isn't it? That's what Kessler texted me an hour ago. He said we were on track." The whole room heard it. Ethan heard it. Victoria heard it. Danny, halfway across the floor with the binder, heard it and stopped walking. Because Victoria had said the engine was down. And this woman, Delia, had answered as if she'd never heard such a thing. But before that, in her very first breath, she'd said she'd been calling. She'd been trying to reach the CEO all morning, which meant somebody had told her there was a reason to call. "Kessler texted you," Victoria repeated. "An hour ago, saying we were on track." "Yes. An hour ago the engine had already failed 4 times, and my entire team was in a panic." Victoria turned to Kessler. "You told her we were on track." Kessler's mouth opened, and nothing came out. "Delia," Victoria said very carefully, "who else did you call this morning?" 9:44. And Delia Vance, head of investor relations for Langford Motors. The woman who had personally arranged for Pinnacle Capital to fly in and put $140 million on the table, stood in the doorway with a tablet in her hands, and understood 1 heartbeat too late that she had just walked into a room that was no longer the room she thought it was. "I don't like your tone," Delia said. "I don't care what you like," Victoria said. "Answer the question. Who did you call?" "I made a dozen calls this morning, Victoria. It's my job to make calls. I don't understand what's happening, but I don't appreciate being." "Give me your phone." Delia's smile finally completely died. "Excuse me. Your phone. Give it to me. Right now. If you called a dozen people this morning and all of them were about coffee orders and parking, then you have nothing to worry about." Victoria held out her hand. "But if one of those calls was to somebody who paid a man named Ferris to put a black box in my engine, then I want to know before I shake a single hand at that gate." The hangar had gone silent again. That particular silence that only comes when a group of people realizes they're watching something break in real time. Delia looked at the phone in her own hand. She looked at the door behind her. She looked at Ferris, and Ferris looked back at her, and something passed between them. Some fast, desperate, wordless thing, and Ethan watched it happen and felt the last piece slide into place. It wasn't one traitor. It was a web. Ferris was the hands. Somebody engineered it. Somebody funded it. Somebody arranged the timing so it would hurt the most. And the woman standing in the doorway with the smile that cost $1 million had known there was a fire this morning before anyone told her there was smoke. "I want a lawyer," Delia said. "Then you are going to need one," Victoria said softly. "Because innocent people don't ask for a lawyer before they've even been accused of anything. They ask what's going on. You asked for a lawyer." 9:45. The wall phone rang. Everyone jumped. Victoria snatched it, listened. Her face went through 3 things in 3 seconds. When she hung up, her hand was steady, but her voice was not. "Security has the building sealed. Nobody in, nobody out." She looked at the doorway. "Delia Ferris, you're both going to a conference room, and you're going to sit there with 2 guards each, and you are not going to talk to each other, and you are not going anywhere until I decide what to do with you." She turned. "But Pinnacle is at the gate. Right now. 3 of them. The managing partner flew in personally. And in 10 minutes I have to walk out there and either shake their hands and put on a show, or tell them my company just caught a saboteur an hour before the biggest deal of my life." She said it to the room, but she was looking at Ethan when she said it. "What do I do?" she said. And it wasn't rhetorical. She was a 31-year-old CEO asking a maintenance contractor in front of her entire engineering department what she should do. 11 months of building a wall of certainty, and she'd just torn a hole in it in front of everyone, because the certainty had almost cost her everything, and this man's uncertainty had saved it. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "You want the honest answer or the easy one?" "The honest one. I've had enough of easy this morning." "The honest one is you have 2 problems and they're pulling in opposite directions." He set the rag down. "Problem 1, there's $140 million at your gate, and if you send them home spooked, you might not get another shot, and this company might not survive the year. That problem says smile, run the engine, take the check deal with the traders quietly on Monday. And problem 2 is you don't know how deep this goes." Ethan nodded at the black box. "That thing wasn't built to fail today. It was built to fail later. Under load, in front of the world, which means whoever planned this wanted the money to come in first. They wanted Pinnacle to write the check, and then they wanted the engine to blow up so catastrophically that the money would burn, and this company and everybody in it would go down in flames with $140 million of somebody else's cash. That problem says, do not take the check today. Because if you take money for a machine you're not 100% sure is clean, and it fails the way it was designed to fail, you don't just lose a company. You get sued into the ground. You maybe go to prison. That problem says, stop the whole thing. The room was dead quiet. So which is it? Victoria said. Take the money or stop the deal? That's not my call to make. I'm making it your call. No, Ethan said, and for the first time all morning there was iron in it. You don't get to do that. You're the CEO. This is exactly the moment you exist for. A contractor doesn't decide whether Langford Motors takes $140 million. You do. I can tell you what's true about the machine. I can't tell you what's true about your company. That's yours. 9:46. Victoria Langford stared at him, and something moved across her face. And it wasn't anger, and it wasn't fear. It was recognition. The recognition of being told the truth by someone who had nothing to gain from telling it to her. Okay, she said quietly. Then tell me what's true about the machine. Can you make it clean? Actually clean. Not probably fine. Clean enough that I could bet the whole company and my freedom on it running perfectly in front of those people. Ethan looked at the engine for a long moment. Give me the 20 minutes, he said. Real 20. Keep Kessler away from it. Give me Danny and one other person I choose, and I'll walk every line, every sensor, every relay, and I'll rebuild that startup harness from the master schematic with my own hands part by part, and I'll be able to tell you not, probably. I'll be able to tell you yes or no. He met her eyes. But you have to do your part. You have to buy me the time. You have to walk out to that gate, and you have to be the best liar you've ever been in your life. And you have to make 3 of the richest people in America believe that everything is perfect, while I take your engine apart behind that curtain. Can you do that? And Victoria Langford, who had laughed at this man 40 minutes ago, who had called him a floor, who had threatened to have him arrested, straightened her jacket, and lifted her chin, and became in the space of one breath the woman her father had raised. Watch me, she said. She turned to go. Then she stopped. She turned back. Ferris, Delia, take them out the back quiet, no scene. She pointed at 2 engineers. You 2 with security, make sure of it. She looked at Kessler last, and her voice dropped to something almost gentle, which was the most frightening thing she'd said all day. Kessler, you're going to sit right there in the middle of the floor where everyone can see you, and you're not going to move, and you're not going to touch a phone. And when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about a text message you sent an hour ago. Are we clear? Victoria, I swear to you. Are we clear? Kessler sat down. 9:47. Victoria walked toward the main doors, heels sharp on the concrete, and just before she pushed through them into the daylight and the money and the performance of her life, she looked back over her shoulder one more time, and she found the contractor already elbow-deep in her engine, and she said one more thing quiet enough that only he could hear it over the distance. Don't make me a liar out there, Carter. Don't get caught being one. Ethan said, not looking up. There's a difference. Go. She went. And then it was just Ethan and Danny and an engine that might save a company or destroy it and a clock that would not stop moving. Okay, Ethan said, and rolled his shoulders, and the tiredness was gone from him. Now burned off by something older and cleaner, the pure focus of a man doing the one thing on earth he was built to do. Danny, first thing, forget everything you were taught about trusting the diagnostic. The diagnostic is a liar. It's been lying all morning. We trust nothing that runs on software. We trust the schematic, and we trust our hands, and we trust our eyes. Understand? Yeah. Danny's hands were still shaking a little. Yeah, okay. Who's the third person you said you'd pick a third? Ethan scanned the room. 20 engineers sitting watching, half of them still looking at him like he was a floor, and half of them looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a collapsing building. He needed someone with clean hands. Someone the traitors would never have recruited. Someone who'd been so overlooked that nobody had bothered to turn them. His eyes stopped on a woman near the back. Older. Quiet. She hadn't said a word all morning. She had a coffee-stained badge and reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and the specific tired competence of somebody who'd been doing the real work for 30 years, while men with better titles took the credit. "You," Ethan said. "What do you do here?" The woman blinked, surprised to be seen. "Quality assurance, harness inspection mostly. I sign off on the wiring." The room shifted. A couple of engineers exchanged looks. Because if she signed off on the wiring and the wiring had a black box in it, then wasn't she? She didn't miss it, Ethan said before anyone could say it, reading the room the way he read the floor. "You want to know how I know she didn't miss it? Because whoever built that box built it to be missed. It was designed to pass every inspection she'd ever run. It's not her failure. It's proof of how good the person who built it was." He looked at her. "But you know that harness better than anyone alive, don't you? Every inch of it. You've had your hands on all of it." 26 years, the woman said quietly. "I could draw it in my sleep." "What's your name, Pia?" "Marta." "Marta, get over here. You, me, and Danny. We're going to save this company in 18 minutes, and then we're going to make sure the people who tried to kill it never work again. You in?" Marta stood up. For the first time in a long time, somebody had asked her opinion like it mattered, and it straightened her spine 10 years. "I'm in," she said. 9:48. Outside, faintly through the great doors, they could hear it. Victoria's voice, bright and warm and completely beautifully false. "Welcome. Welcome. So glad you flew in yourself. No, the pleasure's all mine. Can I get you anything? The coffee here is criminally good." The sound of a woman betting her whole life on a bluff. Inside, Ethan Carter put his hand flat on the engine block one more time, closed his eyes, and started to listen. Danny Master Schematic Harness Section. Page 1. "Marta, you're my second set of eyes. You catch anything that doesn't match you. Stop me, even if I'm mid-word. We start at the ECU, and we work outward. Every connector, every splice, every relay. We count them all." He opened his eyes. "And if we find a second box, nobody says a word out loud. You tap my shoulder. Because I promise you, whoever built the first one is close enough to be listening for us to find the second." That landed on the room like cold water. The idea that even now, even with Ferris hauled away, someone might still be here watching, waiting. Marta glanced around the hangar at the 20 faces, and for the first time looked at her own colleagues as strangers. "Start," Ethan said. And they started. The first 10 lines were clean. Ethan's fingers moved through the harness like a pianist, tracing each wire from origin to destination, calling the part, waiting for Danny to confirm it, against the master, waiting for Marta's nod. Relay junction sensor. Clean, clean, clean. His hands remembered everything. 10 years of filling cracks in floors, and his hands had forgotten nothing. And there was a grief in that so deep he didn't have time to feel it. "Clean," he said. Next, the fuel rail sensor line. 9:50. They found the second box on the fuel rail sensor line. Ethan's fingers stopped. He didn't say anything. He didn't change his expression. But Marta was watching his face, and she saw it go still. And she went still, too. He reached in slow, and his fingertips found a shape that shouldn't be there. Another matchbox. Another pair of hand-soldered leads spliced with the same expert care into a line that fed data about fuel pressure to the engine's brain. He didn't pull it. He left it exactly where it was. He turned his head casually and found Danny, and he tapped his own shoulder once the signal, and Danny's face drained white. But Danny didn't say a word. Ethan leaned close to the two of them and dropped his voice under the ambient hum of the hangar so low it was almost breath. "There's a second one. Fuel rail line. And I want to tell you something, and I want you to keep your faces exactly the way they are right now while I tell you." He kept his hands moving, pretending to work in case anyone was watching. The first box was on the startup line. That's a this morning problem. It stops the engine from starting. But this one. He swallowed. This one's on the fuel pressure sensor. This one doesn't stop anything. This one lies. This one tells the engine the fuel pressure is fine when it isn't. And you know what happens to an engine that thinks its fuel pressure is fine when it's actually climbing past redline. Marta's face, to her enormous credit, did not move, but her voice when it came was barely there. It runs perfect, right up until it doesn't. Right up until it comes apart at 10,000 RPM with $140 million of investors standing 20 feet away, Ethan said. The first box was insurance. In case something went wrong and the engine failed this morning, fine, embarrassing, survivable. But the second box is the real plan. The second box is the one that was always supposed to work. The second box is the one that turns a demonstration into a funeral. 9:51. 9 minutes until Victoria walked 3 of the richest people in America into a hangar to watch an engine that had been engineered patiently, expertly, by someone who worked here to detonate. "We can pull it," Danny whispered. "You found it. We pull it, we bridge the line clean, same as the first one, we're done." "We pull the second box," Ethan said slowly, "and we've made the engine safe. So pull it." "But we've also told them we found it." Danny stared at him. "What?" "Think." Ethan's hands kept moving, calm, unhurried, a man tracing wires, while his mind ran at 1,000 miles an hour. Whoever planned this, they're not gone. Ferris was the hands. Delia was the money. But somebody engineered this. Somebody who understood this machine well enough to know exactly where a lying sensor would do the most damage. That's not Ferris. Ferris is a splicer, he installs what he's handed. And it's not Delia. She wouldn't know a fuel rail from a curtain rod. Somebody built the plan. And that somebody is going to be watching the engine run. They're going to be standing right there when it fires up, waiting for the moment it comes apart, so they can look shocked and horrified, along with everybody else. He looked up, and his eyes were hard. So, if we pull the box and run a clean engine, it just runs fine, and they walk away free, and they know we're onto them, and they go to ground, and they try again in 6 months from a safe distance. But if we don't pull it, Marta understood first. 26 years of watching men underestimate her had made her very, very good at seeing the trap before the men did. "If we don't pull it," she breathed, "we control it. We make it look dangerous. We wire it so we decide when it fails. And we watch their faces. Because the one person in this whole building who won't be surprised when that engine starts to scream." Her eyes came up. "Is the person who built the plan?" Ethan almost smiled. "Marta," he said, "where were you my whole life?" 9:52. "Here's what we're going to do," Ethan said. And now the plan was pouring out of him, fully formed the way it used to, back when he was the smartest guy in rooms much bigger than this one. "We leave the second box in. But Danny, you and I are going to reroute the fuel pressure signal so the real number goes to a monitor, only I can see right here on this bench hidden. The engine's brain still gets the fake number from the box. But I get the truth. Which means I know in real time exactly how close that engine is to letting go, and nobody else in the room does. Not the investors, not Victoria, not the person who built the box. "You're going to run a bomb in front of investors," Danny said, on purpose. "I'm going to run a bomb in front of investors that only I know is a bomb, and I'm going to have my hand on the cutoff the entire time. And the second I see that fuel pressure start to climb, I kill it. And the engine survives, and the demonstration survives, and the only person in that room who reacts the wrong way, the only person who was counting on it to keep climbing, the only person whose face falls when it doesn't blow." He picked up the master schematic and rolled it into a tube. "That's the person we're looking for." 9:53. Marta stared at him. "That's either the smartest thing I've ever heard or the most insane." "Usually it's both," Ethan said. "Danny, get me a laptop that's never touched this network, a clean one, yours, whatever, and get me a splitter for the sensor line. Marta, I need you to inspect every other line while we do this, all of them, because I need to know if there's a third box, and I need to know in the next 4 minutes. Move, both of you. Move." They moved. And Ethan Carter, alone for a second with the engine that had once been his kind of dream, put his hand on it one more time and thought about his daughter and thought about the $12 field trip slip on the refrigerator that he still didn't know if he could sign, and thought about how strange it was that a life could take everything from you and then hand you on your knees on somebody else's floor the exact thing you were born to do, all in the same morning. 9:54. The great doors at the far end of the hangar began to open, and Ethan looked up, and through the widening gap he saw daylight and three figures in expensive coats and Victoria Langford, walking beside them with a smile so bright and so false it could have powered the whole building, and he heard her voice float across the enormous space, warm as summer, steady as stone. "And here she is," Victoria was saying. "Gentlemen, welcome to the future. I think you're going to want to see this." And Ethan Carter had 4 minutes to arm the trap, and a hand that would have to stay on that cutoff for the performance of both their lives and a room that still contained the one person who'd built a machine to murder a company, and he turned back to the engine, and he got to work. 4 minutes. Ethan had 4 minutes, and the doors were open, and the money was walking in. "Danny, the laptop now," he said, not turning around, his hands already back in the harness. Danny slid a battered personal laptop onto the workbench. "Never been on the company network. It's got my kids' cartoons on it, that's about it." "Perfect. Cartoons never lied to anybody." Ethan flipped it open. "Marta, third box, yes or no?" Marta had been moving down the far side of the engine faster than Ethan had ever seen anyone inspect a harness. Her fingers flying, her lips moving as she counted parts against a diagram she'd memorized decades ago. She straightened up. "No third box," she said. "2. Startup line and fuel rail. That's all of them. I'd stake my pension on it." "Your pension might be exactly what you're staking," Ethan said. "Okay, 2 boxes. One we already understand, one we're about to weaponize. Danny, hand me the splitter." 9:55. Across the enormous floor, Victoria Langford was walking 3 men in expensive coats toward the platform, and her voice carried warm and unhurried, buying Ethan every second she could. "Now, I'll be honest with you, gentlemen, most people in my position would have had the engine already running when you walked in. All the drama, the reveal, the curtain drop." A light laugh. "But I wanted you to see it cold. I wanted you to watch it come alive. Because anybody can show you a machine that's already running. I wanted to show you a birth." Ethan almost admired it. She was turning a delay into a feature. She was so good at the lie that if he hadn't known better, he'd have believed the whole thing was staged. He kept his eyes on his hands. The splitter went onto the fuel rail sensor line clean. The real signal, the true fuel pressure, split off and ran down a hair-thin lead into Danny's cartoon laptop, where Ethan pulled up a single ugly readout, a number, and a line, "Nothing pretty. Just the truth." The engine's brain would still get the lie from the black box, but Ethan would get the truth on a screen no one else would look at twice. "Test it," he said. "Danny, crank the fuel pump. Don't start the engine, just prime it." Danny hit the priming switch. On the laptop, the number climbed, held, settled. On the engine's own display, 6 feet away, the black box fed it a different number, entirely calm and false. "There," Ethan breathed. "There it is. The engine thinks fuel pressure is 41. It's actually 44, 3 off. Doesn't matter at idle, but at full load." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. 9:56. "Miss Langford." A voice called across the floor, and it was one of the Pinnacle men. Older, silver-haired, the managing partner, the one who'd flown in personally. "This is quite a facility. Quite a lot of engineers standing around doing nothing, though, if you don't mind my saying." "Everything all right?" Ethan's stomach dropped. 20 engineers sitting on equipment cases, silent, tense, and now the money had noticed. But Victoria didn't miss a beat. "Ah, you caught us. We just finished a full systems verification top to bottom. That's my whole team, and I like them here for a first start. Every one of them can vouch that what you're about to see is real, that there are no tricks, no pre-recordings, no smoke and mirrors. When Langford Motors shows an investor an engine, that investor gets to see it with the people who built it standing right there ready to answer any question you've got." She smiled. "Transparency, Mr. Halloran. It's the whole reason you flew out, isn't it? Because you'd heard we do things differently here. Halloran's eyebrows went up impressed, despite himself. It is at that. Marta, standing next to Ethan, whispered, "She's good. She's fighting for her life," Ethan said. "People are always good when they're fighting for their lives. Danny, we're out of time. Talk to me." When she says, "Start," I need the sequence locked. The engine fires on the clean startup line. The fuel rail box stays live. I watch the true pressure here, and when I say kill you, kill it. No questions, no hesitation, even if it's mid-sentence, even if it looks perfect. When I say kill you, kill. Got it. Got it. Say it back. When you say kill, I kill. No hesitation. Good man. 9:57. And then a thing happened that Ethan hadn't planned for. Kessler stood up. He'd been sitting in the middle of the floor where Victoria had ordered him in plain view, hands on his knees for 6 minutes. And now slowly, he stood, and he started walking toward the platform, toward the engine, toward the investors, and there was something in his face that Ethan didn't like at all. "Danny," Ethan said quietly. "Kessler's up." Danny looked. "What's he doing?" "I don't know, but keep your body between him and this laptop. Whatever happens, he doesn't see this screen." Kessler reached the platform. He put on a smile for the investors. A chief engineer's smile, confident and easy, and he stuck out his hand to Halloran. "Bill Kessler, chief engineer, 19 years. I oversaw every bolt on this engine." He shook the man's hand. "Miss Langford's too modest to say it, but this is the most advanced propulsion system anybody's built in a generation. It's going to change everything." And Ethan understood, watching him, exactly what Kessler was doing. He was inserting himself. He was making sure that when the money remembered this day, they remembered his hand, his name, his 19 years. He was building an alibi in real time, a story where he was the proud father of the engine, so that later, when questions got asked, he'd be the last person anyone suspected. But Ethan had seen where Ferris's eyes went first. "Mr. Kessler," Ethan called out, and his voice cut across the floor, clear and calm, and every head turned. Kessler froze. "What? You said you oversaw every bolt on this engine?" "That's right. Every line, every sensor, every relay." A pause. "Yes. Then you'd know, wouldn't you?" Ethan held up nothing. His hands were empty, but he held them up like a man holding evidence, and the whole room leaned in. "You'd know exactly how many relays are on the fuel rail sensor line." 9:58. Kessler's face did the thing. The color, then the too much color. I'm not going to stand here and get quizzed by a floor contractor in front of our investors. This is absurd, Victoria. This man is... How many?" Ethan said. "I don't memorize part counts. Nobody memorizes." "She does." Ethan nodded at Marta. 26 years she can draw the whole harness in her sleep. So can I now, because I've had my hands in it for 20 minutes. But you oversaw every bolt for 19 years, and you can't tell me how many relays are on one line." He let it sit. "Or is it that you can and you don't want to say the number out loud, because you know the real answer, and you know the answer that's supposed to be on the diagram aren't the same?" The hangar was dead silent. Halloran and the two other Pinnacle men were looking back and forth between the contractor and the chief engineer with the specific alertness of men who have made fortunes by noticing when something is wrong in a room. "Victoria," Kessler said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. "Are you going to let this nobody, this maintenance man, stand here and—" "His name," Victoria said quietly, "is Ethan Carter. And 40 minutes ago, he found the reason your engine wouldn't start after your team failed for 6 hours. So no, Bill, I'm not going to let him. I'm going to listen to him. And I think you should start explaining why you're so afraid of a question about part counts." 9:59. Halloran cleared his throat. "Miss Langford, I flew in this morning expecting a demonstration, not a whatever this is. I'll be candid. My partners and I do not invest in drama. We invest in stability. And right now, this room does not look stable." He buttoned his coat. "Perhaps we should reschedule." And there it was. The whole thing hanging by a thread. $140 million turning toward the door. Ethan saw Victoria's face, saw the flash of pure animal panic she covered in half a second, and he understood that this was the moment, the actual moment where the company lived or died. So he did the only thing he could do. He raised the stakes. "Mr. Halloran," Ethan said, "don't reschedule. Watch." Halloran turned. "Excuse me. You said you invest in stability, not drama. Fair enough. But you also flew across the country to see something nobody else has. So here's my offer, and I'm just the floor guy, so take it for what it's worth." He gestured at the engine. "In 2 minutes, Miss Langford is going to start this engine, and it's going to run perfectly. And while it runs, I'm going to tell you a story about what almost happened to it this morning and why it didn't. And by the time that engine shuts off, you're going to understand that the reason you should invest in this company isn't the engine at all." He looked at Victoria. It's her. It's what she did in the last hour. Because any company can build a good engine. But you can count on one hand the companies that can survive a knife in the back on the morning of the biggest deal of their life and still put on the show. He turned back to Halloran. "You want stability. You just walked into the most unstable morning this company will ever have. Watch how it ends, then decide." Halloran stared at him. So did his partners. So did Victoria. "Who is this man?" Halloran said to her. Victoria looked at Ethan for a long moment, and then she said quietly, "He's the best engineer in this building. He just didn't have a badge until today." 10 o'clock. Something moved across Ethan's chest at that. Something he didn't have time to feel, and he shoved it down with everything else and turned back to his laptop, to the ugly little readout, to the true number, waiting for the moment it would start to climb. "All right," Halloran said slowly, and sat down on a stool. One of the engineers slid under him. "Start your engine, Miss Langford. Tell me your story. But I warn you, I've heard a lot of stories." "Not this one," Victoria said. She looked at Danny. She looked at Ethan. Ethan gave her a single small nod. His hand already resting light on the cutoff switch, his eyes already on the truth screen. "Start it," Victoria said. Danny hit the starter. The engine caught on the first turn, clean perfect. That furious beautiful roar, rolling through the hangar, and the 3 Pinnacle men leaned back at the raw power of it, and Halloran's careful, skeptical face cracked into something almost like wonder, and for a moment, one glorious moment, everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. On the truth screen, fuel pressure read 41. Steady, calm, safe. "Bring it up," Ethan said quietly just to Danny. Danny eased the throttle. The engine climbed the note, deepening the whole platform, singing with it. 42, 43. "Tell them," Ethan murmured to Victoria. And Victoria Langford, standing beside an engine that had almost been her tombstone, began to tell 3 of the richest men in America the truth, the actual truth, in a voice that started shaking and got stronger with every word. "An hour ago," she said, "this engine would not start. My team, the best engineers in the country, worked on it for 6 hours and couldn't find why. And I did something this morning I'm not proud of. There was a man in this room fixing my floor. A contractor, and he tried to tell me what was wrong, and I laughed at him. I called him a floor. I threatened to have him arrested." Her voice caught. "And he was right about everything." 10:01. Fuel pressure 44. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Climbing. Slow, but climbing. The lie was starting. And somewhere in this room, someone was waiting for it. "He found a device hidden in the wiring," Victoria went on. "Somebody who works for me, who I trusted, who I signed medical leave for, planted a device designed to make this engine fail. Not today. Today would have just been embarrassing." She was looking at Halloran now, dead level, the whole truth naked in her voice. "It was designed to let the engine run long enough to get your money. And then later, under full load in front of the whole world, it was designed to make this engine come apart so catastrophically that Langford Motors would be destroyed, and your $140 million would burn with it." The 2 junior Pinnacle men went rigid. Halloran's face changed, and it was no longer wonder, it was something sharper. Older, the face of a man who had almost stepped on a landmine and just felt the click. "You're telling me," Halloran said slowly, "that if I had come here yesterday and written you a check, I'd have lost all of it." "I'm telling you," Victoria said, "that a man I laughed at is the only reason you didn't." 10:02. Fuel pressure 46. Faster now. The climb was accelerating. Ethan's thumb settled more firmly on the cutoff, and his eyes swept the room, once fast looking for the face. The one face that would be watching the engine, not the CEO. The one face waiting for the scream. He found it in half a second. Not Kessler. Kessler was staring at Victoria, sweating cornered, watching his alibi collapse. Kessler was afraid. The face Ethan was looking for wasn't afraid. It was hungry. It was tilted toward the engine lips, slightly parted, eyes bright with an anticipation that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with a countdown. It was a face waiting for a payoff. It belonged to Danny's supervisor, a man named Osgood, head of the controls team, Ferris's boss, the man who signed off on Ferris's work. A quiet, mid-level, utterly forgettable man that Ethan had walked past 4 times that morning without a second glance, because that was exactly what the man had spent his whole career becoming. Forgettable. Ferris was the hands. Delia was the money. And Osgood, Ethan understood in one cold rush, was the mind. Osgood knew this engine. Osgood knew exactly where a lying sensor would do the most damage. Osgood had built the plan, handed the boxes to Ferris to install, and then sat back in the most ordinary chair in the room to watch a company die. And right now, Osgood was leaning toward the engine, waiting for the fuel pressure to climb past the point of no return, waiting for the beautiful, catastrophic scream that would end everything. Fuel pressure 48. "Ethan," Danny said under his breath, urgent, "the number it's." "I see it." 49. The engine still sounded perfect. To every ear in that room, it was flawless, glorious, the future arriving. That was the horror of it. It sounded better than ever, right up until the moment it would tear itself to pieces. That was the whole design. Death that sang. 50. Ethan watched Osgood. Osgood watched the engine. The man's hands had come together in his lap, fingers, laced knuckles white, a man holding himself back from a smile. 51. "Ethan," Danny hissed. "Wait. It's red line, it's past." Wait. Because Ethan needed one more second. He needed the room to see it. Not the number, they couldn't see the number, only he could. But he needed to bring the moment to the exact edge close enough that when he killed it, and the engine survived, the only person whose face would fall, the only person in the entire hangar who would react to a perfect engine with disappointment, would be the man who'd built it to die. 52. Ethan looked at Osgood one last time. And Osgood, God help him, smiled. "Now," Ethan said, and killed it. 10:03. His thumb hit the cutoff, and the engine died instantly, the roar collapsing into silence, and the whole room jumped at the suddenness of it. And for one heartbeat, nobody understood what had happened. Except 2 people. Victoria, who saw Ethan's thumb on the switch and understood he'd done it on purpose and felt her heart stop. And Osgood, whose smile died a half-second too late. Whose face in front of the entire engineering department and 3 investors and a CEO and a contractor fell into open, naked, unmistakable dismay. The dismay of a man who had watched the winning number come up on the wheel and then watched the house sweep his chips away one instant before the payout. He caught himself fast. Half a second, and he rearranged his face into the same concern everyone else wore. But half a second was all Ethan had needed. Half a second was forever. "Huh," Ethan said mildly into the silence, wiping his hands on his rag, not looking at Osgood at all. "Shut it off myself. Wanted to check something." He glanced at Halloran. "Sorry about the drama, Mr. Halloran. Engine's perfect, runs like a dream. I just needed to see who in this room was sad to see it stop. Nobody understood him. Not yet." Then Marta quietly said, "Osgood." Every head in the room turned to the head of the controls team. Osgood stood up too fast. What is this? I don't know what he's talking about." "You smiled," Marta said. 26 years of being overlooked, and her voice was steady as steel. The engine hit full load, and it started to run wrong. I could hear it in the last 2 seconds, a tiny flutter, and you smiled. And when he shut it off, you looked like somebody'd died. She took a step toward him. I've watched you sign Ferris's work for 3 years, Osgood. I always thought you were lazy, rubber stamping his inspections without looking. I never once thought you weren't looking because you already knew exactly what was in there. 10:04. That's insane, Osgood said. She's making it up. She's covering for her own bad inspections. She signs the harness. If there was something wrong in there, it's her signature on the paperwork Ferris handed me, Marta said. The paperwork you generated. The revision logs you controlled. She was shaking now, but not with fear. With 26 years of rage finally finding its target. You gave me diagrams to inspect against that already had the boxes hidden as approved parts. Of course I signed. I was inspecting the harness against a lie you wrote. The room was making that sound again, that collective, indrawn breath, as one man's carefully built forgettableness came apart thread by thread in front of everyone. Ferris looked at Kessler. Danny said suddenly loud, and everyone turned to him. When Miss Langford asked who paid him, Ferris looked at Kessler first. We all saw it. We all thought it meant Kessler. He looked at Osgood. But Ferris doesn't report to Kessler. Ferris reports to you. He looked at the org chart, the guy above him, and Kessler's the name at the top, so his eyes went up, but the man who actually handed him those boxes. Danny's voice hardened past his years. The man he actually flinched away from admitting. That's you. That's you, isn't it? Osgood's mouth opened and closed. 10:05. Get his phone, Victoria said. You can't, Osgood started. Get his phone. 2 engineers, big ones, the kind of men who'd spent the whole morning sitting quietly and were now very glad to have something to do, closed in on Osgood from both sides. He backed up, hit the platform, had nowhere to go. And then Osgood did the thing that ended it. He looked at Delia. She wasn't in the room. She'd been hauled to a conference room 10 minutes ago, but Osgood's eyes went to the door she'd left through an instinct, a plea looking for his partner. And everyone saw it, and everyone understood, and Osgood saw them understand, and the fight went out of him all at once. She said it was safe, Osgood said. His voice had gone thin and high. Delia said she said it was low risk, that the payout was that nobody would ever. She said the boxes were untraceable. She promised me they were untraceable. Osgood. Kessler said, horrified. Shut up, get a lawyer. You knew. Osgood turned on Kessler, wild now. Don't you stand there, you knew. You texted Delia this morning. You told her we were on track, you knew what on track meant, 10:06. And the whole thing broke open at once right there on the floor in front of $140 million. I texted her the engine was down, Kessler roared. I said we had a problem. I didn't know what you'd done. I didn't know about any boxes. I thought the thing had just failed. You told her before you told me, Victoria said, and her voice cut through both of them like a blade. That's the part, Bill. That's the part you're going to have to explain. The engine failed, and your first call wasn't to your CEO. It was to investor relations. To Delia. Why would a chief engineer in a crisis call the investor liaison before he calls the person running the company? She stepped toward him. Unless the two of you had an arrangement about how information moved in this company. Unless you were used to keeping Delia in the loop on things you kept from me. Kessler had no answer. His mouth worked. Nothing came out. I didn't know about the sabotage, he finally said. And it came out as a whisper, and it might even have been true. I swear to you, Victoria, I didn't know about the boxes. But, he closed his eyes. But Delia and I, there were things, numbers we shaded, timelines we managed, for the investors, to keep the money coming. I didn't know Osgood was going to, I never would have, but yes. Delia and I have been managing information for a year. I never thought it would become this. 10:07. 3 confessions in 90 seconds. Osgood, who built it. Kessler, who'd been rotten in a smaller way and stood too close to the fire. And the shape of Delia in the next room, the money, the coordinator, the one who told a corrupt engineer the boxes were untraceable, and told a weak chief engineer to shade the numbers, and told a desperate saboteur it was low risk. And standing in the middle of it, 3 investors who had flown in expecting a demonstration and instead watched a company's entire cancer get cut out in front of them in real time. Ethan Carter set down his rag. He was tired. Bone tired, the specific tiredness that comes not from the body, but from feeling too much in too short a time. He'd walked into this hangar at 7 in the morning to fix a floor, and it was 10:07, and he'd found 2 bombs and 3 traitors, and run a machine to the edge of destruction with his own thumb on the trigger, and now it was done, and the exhaustion was hitting him like water through a broken dam. He looked over at Victoria. She was staring at the wreckage of her leadership team, at the men she'd trusted, and her face was doing something terrible and quiet. Ethan knew that face. He'd worn it himself years ago, on the worst day of his own professional life. The face of someone realizing the ground they'd been standing on had never been solid at all. 10:08. Halloran stood up from his stool. The whole room turned to him because he was the money, and the money's face right now was the only thing that mattered, and nobody could read it. He walked slowly across the floor, past the confessing men, past the engineers. He walked right up to the engine, and he put his hand on it the way he'd seen Ethan do, and he felt the warmth still radiating off the block, the heat of a machine that had run perfectly, and then been saved at the last possible second. Then he turned and looked at Ethan. "You knew," Halloran said. "You knew the whole time. You ran it to the edge on purpose." "Yes, sir. You bet this entire deal, this whole company, on your ability to shut off an engine at exactly the right moment. If you'd been half a second slow." "I wasn't." "But if you had been," Ethan met his eyes, "then it would have come apart, and everyone would have seen the sabotage was real, and Miss Langford would still have caught 3 traitors, and you'd have walked out of here knowing this company tells the truth, even when the truth costs it everything. Either way, you learn the same thing about who she is." He shrugged, tired. "The engine was never the point, Mr. Halloran. I told you that when you walked in." 10:09. Halloran looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Victoria. "Miss Langford," he said, "I have been investing in companies for 31 years. I have seen 100 perfect demonstrations. Flawless, rehearsed, beautiful. And I have lost money on almost every one of them, because a perfect demonstration tells you nothing about what a company does when things go wrong." He glanced back at the engine. "I have never in 31 years watched a company discover a conspiracy in its own ranks, extract it, and confess the entire thing to my face, all in the 10 minutes before it asked me for money." A thin smile. "You've shown me something today I've never seen. You've shown me what you do on your worst possible morning." Victoria couldn't speak. Ethan watched her try and fail and just stand there. "I need to talk to my partners," Halloran said. "And you need to call the police, and you need lawyers, and this is going to be a very long day. But I'll tell you this much right now before I've even discussed it with them." He buttoned his coat. "I came here today about an engine. I'm leaving here thinking about a leader." He nodded once at Ethan. "And about whoever this man is that you didn't have the sense to hire until this morning." 10:10. He walked toward the doors, his 2 partners falling in behind him already murmuring, and the hangar was left with its wreckage, and its confessions, and the sound of sirens beginning far off growing closer. Victoria turned. She found Ethan by the workbench packing his rag into his bucket, because he genuinely didn't seem to know what else to do with his hands. "You could have told me," she said, "about the second box, about the plan. You could have told me before I walked out there and put my whole life on a bluff." "I could have," Ethan agreed. "Why didn't you?" He looked at her, and there was no cruelty in it, none at all, just an honesty so plain it landed harder than any accusation. "Because this morning you didn't trust me," he said. "This morning I was a floor, and a floor doesn't get to tell a CEO to bet her company on his say-so." He picked up his bucket. "You had to walk out there believing your own company was worth fighting for, not because I told you it was safe, but because you decided it was worth the risk even when you didn't know. That's the part Halloran bought. Not the engine, not the trap. That. The part where you didn't know and you did it anyway. He met her eyes. I couldn't give you that. You had to earn it. Victoria Langford, 31 years old, CEO of a company she'd just watched nearly die, stood very still. 10:11. And then quietly, with the sirens getting louder and her leadership team in ruins and $140 million hanging in the balance, she asked the question she should have asked at 7 in the morning, the question that would change both their lives, the question she was almost afraid to hear the answer to. Ethan, she said. Who were you before the floor? And Ethan Carter, holding a bucket of epoxy and rags, standing in the wreckage of the strangest morning of his life, opened his mouth to finally, after 10 years, tell someone the truth. He set the bucket down again. 9 years ago, Ethan said, I was the lead propulsion engineer at Meridian Aerospace. Marta, standing a few feet away, made a small sound. She knew the name. Everyone in engineering knew the name. I had a master's from a school I couldn't afford that I paid off designing turbine systems that are still flying today. 4 patents. My name's on all of them. I ran a team of 30 people and I was good at it, better than good. I was the guy they put on the problems nobody else could solve. He wasn't looking at Victoria now. He was looking at the engine. The architecture of this engine of yours, the intake routing, the way the control systems are packaged. Somebody on your design team read my old papers. This machine is built on ideas I helped invent. I recognized it the second you pulled the cloth off. That's part of why I couldn't walk away this morning. It was like running into your own kid grown up in a stranger's house. 10:12. Then what happened? Victoria said quietly. Ethan was silent for a moment. My wife got sick, he said. Sarah, it was fast and it was bad. And there's a kind of sick where the insurance company finds a reason your plan doesn't quite cover the treatment that might actually work. We appealed. We fought. I spent 6 months on the phone with people whose whole job was to say no politely. His jaw tightened. I missed deadlines. I missed meetings. I missed a launch review that I was supposed to run because Sarah had a bad night, and I wasn't going to leave her. And Meridian, which had a market cap of $9 billion, decided that a lead engineer who couldn't guarantee he'd be at every meeting was a liability. He shrugged, and the shrug cost him something. They let me go. Quietly. Generous severance, they called it, which lasted about as long as the treatments did. And then Sarah died anyway, and I had a 4-year-old and a mountain of medical debt and a resume with a gap in it that every hiring manager treated like a confession. Nobody in the hangar moved. Turns out, Ethan said, there's a thing that happens when you're out of the game for a year. The industry moves on. Your references get old. And every interview they see the gap, and they ask about it, and you tell them your wife was dying, and they nod, and they say how sorry they are, and they never call back. Because a man with a dead wife and a little kid and a debt like mine, he's got problems, and companies don't hire problems, they hire solutions. He finally looked back at Victoria. So after about the 40th, no, I stopped applying for engineering jobs. I needed money that week, not in 3 months after some hiring committee finished deliberating. And a guy I knew from my building did contracting work, and he needed a hand, and it paid same day. And I was good with my hands. So I fixed a floor, and then I fixed another one, and here I am, 10:13. 10 years, Victoria said. 10 years. You've been fixing floors for 10 years when you could have been running rooms like this one. I've been feeding my daughter for 10 years. Ethan corrected her, and there was no self-pity in it, just fact, hard and clean. That's different from wasting them. Every one of those years she ate. Every one of those years she had a coat that fit, and a roof that didn't leak, and a father who picked her up at 6 o'clock. You want to call that a waste, that's your business. I call it the most important engineering project of my life. Keeping one small human alive and okay in a world that took her mother. He shook his head. The circles on the floor, the 7 minutes, the boxes, the whole thing this morning, that was easy compared to that. Machines make sense. Grief doesn't. Give me a broken engine over a bad night with a crying kid any day of the week. Marta was crying openly, not bothering to hide it. Danny was staring at Ethan like the floor had opened under him. And Victoria Langford, who had laughed at this man 3 hours ago, who had called him a floor, who had threatened him with arrest, stood very still and understood fully for the first time the size of what she had almost thrown away with a laugh. 10:14. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You already gave me one out there. You told Halloran you laughed at me, in front of everyone. That was more than most people would do." "That wasn't an apology. That was strategy." Victoria's voice was raw now. "I told him the truth because the truth was useful, because it made a good story about my character. And that's exactly the problem, isn't it? That's exactly what Kessler and Delia did for a year. Shade the truth, manage the story, make everything useful." She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "You saved my company this morning, and my first instinct when I told people about it was to figure out how it made me look good. I turned you into a prop in my own redemption arc before the engine even cooled down." Ethan didn't say anything. He just let her sit in it because some things a person has to say out loud to themselves, and there's no kindness in interrupting. "So this is the real one," Victoria said. She lowered her hands. She stood up straight. And she said it plain, no audience now, or at least none that mattered, just a room full of people who'd watched the whole thing. "Ethan Carter, I looked at your boots and your bucket, and I decided I knew everything about you, and I was wrong about every single part of it, and I am sorry. Not because it's useful, because it's true. I'm sorry." 10:15. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said simply. And that was all. No speech, no absolution. Just a man accepting that a person had finally seen him and choosing to let that be enough. And somehow that plain okay landed harder in that hangar than any grand forgiveness could have. The sirens were at the gate now. Voices outside radios the specific controlled urgency of police arriving at a scene. The morning was about to become a legal matter, a very long and very public one, and everyone in the room could feel the weight of it descending. But before it did, one more thing happened. Halloran came back. He'd stepped out with his partners to talk, and now he came back through the doors alone, and he walked straight to Victoria, and the whole room held its breath again, because the money's face was still unreadable, and the money's decision was still the thing every job in the building hung on. "My partners and I have discussed it," Halloran said. 10:16. Victoria straightened. Whatever was coming, she was going to take it standing up. Ethan watched her do it and felt something like pride, which was strange for a woman he'd met 3 hours ago and hadn't liked for the first two of them. "I'll be honest with you," Halloran said. "Two of the three of us wanted to walk, and I understand why. You've got a criminal conspiracy in your own leadership. You've got a chief engineer who's been cooking numbers for a year. Your head of investor relations, the person who arranged this entire meeting, is being questioned by police as we speak. By any normal metric, Miss Langford, you are exactly the kind of chaos my firm exists to avoid." He paused. "That's what two of my partners said. And the third," Victoria said. "The third is me." Halloran almost smiled. "And I've been doing this long enough to know that the companies that hide their rot are the ones that kill you. The rot's always there. Every company this size has something ugly in it somewhere. The question was never whether Langford Motors had a problem. The question was what you'd do when you found it." He looked around the hangar at the confessing men now sitting in silence, at the engineers, at the contractor. "And what you did? Miss Langford was cut it out in front of the one person you most needed to impress at the exact moment it could have cost you everything, without a second's hesitation. You didn't ask me to look away. You didn't manage the story. You handed me the knife and showed me the wound." He nodded slowly. "I've written a lot of checks in 31 years. That's the first time a founder ever did that. So, 10:17. So, Halloran said, the deal is on. 140 million, on two conditions." Victoria's breath caught. "Name them." 1. A complete independent audit top to bottom of everything Kessler and Delia touched for the last 2 years. If there's more rot, we find it now, together in the light. No surprises. Done. I was going to do that anyway. I know. That's why it's an easy condition. Halloran turned, and he looked of all people at Ethan. 2. Him. Ethan blinked. Me. I don't invest in engines. I told you that. I invest in the people who fix them when they break. Halloran walked toward him. I watched you run a sabotaged engine to the edge of destruction with your thumb on the trigger and your eyes on a screen only you could see, and I watched you time it to catch a saboteur by his own smile. And I watched you do all of it after this company treated you like dirt on the floor for 3 hours. And then I heard where you came from, and I understood that I was watching a $9 billion mind that the entire industry threw away because his wife got sick. He stopped in front of Ethan. My condition, Miss Langford, is that this man does not walk out of here and go back to fixing floors. My money comes with him inside this company in a real role with real authority, or my money doesn't come at all. 10:18. The hangar was silent. Ethan felt every eye on him. And for the first time all morning, the man who always knew exactly what to do didn't know what to do. Because part of him wanted it so badly, it frightened him. The room, the work, the thing he'd been born to do and buried alive to survive. It was right there being handed to him by a man with $140 million, and all he had to do was reach out and take it. And another part of him, the part that had spent 10 years learning not to hope, the part that had been told no 40 times in a row until he stopped asking that part, was screaming that this was a trick, that people like him didn't get handed rooms like this. That the second he let himself want it, it would be snatched away, because that was how his life worked. That was the only way it had ever worked. I have a daughter, Ethan heard himself say. It was the first thing that came out. Not yes, not thank you. I have a daughter. Because she was always the first thing. I imagined she'd like to eat something other than the ends of the bread, Halloran said gently, and Ethan's head snapped up because he'd never said that out loud, and Halloran shrugged. I was poor once too, son. A long time ago. You learn to read it in a man. The way you portioned yourself out this morning, giving everything and asking for 7 minutes like you were embarrassed to ask for anything at all. I know that look. I wore it. He put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You've been surviving for 10 years. Somebody's offering you a chance to live. Take it. 10:19. Ethan looked at Victoria. Is this what you want? He asked her. Because he can put it in the deal, but you're the CEO. You have to be the one who actually wants me here. I've been the guy nobody wanted for 10 years. I'm not doing it again inside a corner office. I'd rather fix floors. And Victoria Langford looked at the man she'd laughed at, and something in her face broke open the last of the wall coming down the certainty she'd built to keep the wolves away, finally giving up its ground to something truer. This morning I had 40 engineers and a chief I'd trusted for a year, she said, and not one of them could save my company. And a man I called a floor did it in 7 minutes, and then he did it again and again all morning. Every time it broke, he fixed it, and every time I doubted him, he was right. Her voice steadied. I don't want you here because Halloran's making me Ethan. I want you here because you're the best engineer I've ever seen. And because this morning, you were also the only honest person in a building full of people I paid to be honest. And because if I'm going to rebuild this company from the ground up, I want to build it with people who tell me the truth even when I'm laughing in their face. She held out her hand. Come work with me. Not for me. With me. Help me build something that doesn't rot. 10:20. Ethan looked at her hand. He thought about Lily. About the $12 field trip slip on the refrigerator that he still hadn't signed. About Rosa, who'd kept his daughter fed and loved for 10 years while he portioned himself out. About Sarah gone now, who'd once told him back when he still ran rooms that his problem was he'd give the whole world to everyone else and keep nothing for himself. One day, someone's going to hand you something good, Ethan, she'd said. And you're going to be so busy taking care of everyone else, you'll forget to just take it. He took it. He shook Victoria Langford's hand there in the wreckage of the worst and best morning of both their lives, and the whole hangar, 20 engineers and a QA inspector who'd been overlooked for 26 years, and a 23-year-old kid who'd tackled a saboteur on the fanciest floor in the building, broke into applause. Ethan didn't know what to do with it. He'd forgotten what applause felt like. He stood there and let it wash over him, and it was almost unbearable the size of it after so many years of silence. 10:21. But he was still Ethan Carter. And there was still one thing that mattered more than the room, more than the applause, more than $140 million. "I have to go get my daughter," he said. "At 6, that's non-negotiable. Whatever this job is, whatever it pays, I pick up my daughter at 6 o'clock every day, and I don't miss it. Not for a launch, not for an investor, not for anything. I missed too much already. I'm done missing things." He looked at Victoria and then at Halloran, hard making sure they heard it. "That's my condition. You want the engineer, you get the father too. They come as a set." And Halloran, the man with $140 million. The man who'd flown across the country and nearly lost it all, threw back his head and laughed, a real laugh. Delighted. "Son," he said, "if you'd said yes to this job and didn't put your kid first, I'd have pulled every dollar right back off the table. The whole reason I want you is that you're the kind of man who portions himself the hard bread and gives the good stuff to an 8-year-old. That's not a weakness I'm tolerating. That's the asset I'm buying." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Go get your daughter at 6, every day, and on the way sign her field trip slip." 10:22. The police came in then, and the morning became a legal thing. Statements and evidence bags, and the black boxes photographed and tagged, and Ferris and Delia and Osgood led out in a way that made the whole industry's news by nightfall, and Kessler resigning on the spot with lawyers already on the phone, and it went on for hours, the unwinding of a year of rot. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, there was a moment. Ethan was giving his statement to a detective near the engine, and he glanced up, and across the hangar, he saw Victoria doing the same thing, and their eyes met over the wreckage over the machine that had almost buried them both, and instead brought them here. And Victoria mouthed 2 words at him across the whole enormous floor. "Thank you." And Ethan Carter, who 3 hours ago had been an invisible man on his knees, a ghost hired to fill cracks in a floor, a father with $42 in his account, and a hard heel of bread in his own lunch, nodded back. For the first time in 10 years, he didn't feel like a ghost. 10:23. He felt like a man who'd just walked back into his own life through a door he thought had been nailed shut forever. And the strangest part, the part he'd think about later that night, after he picked Lily up at 6 and signed the field trip slip at the kitchen table while she told him about her day. The part that would stay with him was this. The door had been unlocked the whole time. He'd just needed someone to stop laughing long enough to see the man standing in front of it. The field trip slip got signed that night at the kitchen table, and Lily went on her field trip, and for a while that was the biggest thing in Ethan Carter's world, because that was the size his world had shrunk to over 10 years, and he wasn't sure yet that it was safe to let it grow. The story got out, though. Stories like that always do. Within a week, the whole automotive industry knew some version of it. The maintenance contractor who'd walked into Langford Motors to fix a floor and instead uncovered a sabotage conspiracy, exposed 3 traitors, and saved a $140 million deal in a single morning. The details got exaggerated in the retelling the way they do. In some versions, Ethan had disarmed a literal bomb. In some versions, he'd fixed the engine with a paperclip. In one version, somebody swore he'd never touched the engine at all, just stared at it until it started working out of respect. The truth was better than all of them. But the truth was too strange for people to believe, so the legends grew instead. 10 years he'd been invisible. Now he couldn't walk through the Langford building without someone pointing. He hated it mostly. Ethan Carter had spent a decade learning how to disappear, and disappearing had kept him alive. And now, here he was, the most visible man in the company. And every instinct he had screamed that visibility was danger. That the higher you climbed, the harder they threw you off. That he'd learned this lesson once already at Meridian Aerospace, and the tuition had been his wife and 9 years of his life. He said as much to Victoria 3 weeks in her office. "Everybody's looking at me," he said. "I don't like it. At Meridian, when everybody's looking at you, it means you're the one they're about to cut." Victoria set down her pen. She'd changed in 3 weeks, Or maybe she'd just stopped pretending. The wall of certainty was gone. What was underneath was harder and quieter, and Ethan thought a great deal more real. "You're not at Meridian," she said. "And nobody here is going to cut you, because if they cut you, Halloran pulls $140 million and the whole company dies. You are the single most protected employee in this building." A pause. "But that's not really what you're afraid of, is it?" Ethan didn't answer. "You're afraid," Victoria said gently, "that if you let yourself want this, it'll get taken away. Because everything you ever wanted got taken away. Your job, your wife, your whole life. So you've trained yourself to never want anything except keeping your daughter fed, because that's the only thing they couldn't take." Ethan looked at the floor. "You should have been a therapist." "I've had a lot of practice this month figuring out why people do what they do," she said. "Turns out I was surrounded by liars and never learned to read anybody. I'm making up for lost time." The audit had come back, and it was worse than anyone had feared and better than it could have been. Kessler and Delia had been shading numbers for a full year, inflating test results, hiding failures, managing a story for investors that was maybe 60% true. Osgood's sabotage was the endgame of a plan that had started small, the way these things always do, with one shaded number that didn't get caught, and then another, until the gap between the story and the truth got so wide that the only way to close it was to burn the whole thing down and collect on the insurance of a short position that Delia had quietly set up through 3 shell companies. They'd been betting against their own company. They'd been planning to make more money from Langford Motors failing than it would ever have made succeeding. Ethan had been the crack in that plan, the one variable nobody accounted for. The floor guy. "They almost got away with it," Victoria said. "If you hadn't been on your knees in the East Bay that morning, if the cracks hadn't caught a pallet jack, if I hadn't hired the cheapest contractor available, which by the way I did because I was pinching pennies for the investor meeting." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The cheapest contractor in the city saved my company because he happened to be a $9 billion mine that the world threw in the trash. Do you understand how insane that is? Do you understand how close I came to losing everything because I couldn't see past a pair of work boots?" "You're not the first person who couldn't see past them," Ethan said. "You're just the first one who apologized for it." 6 months passed. They were not easy months. Rebuilding a company after you've cut out its rotten heart never is. There were resignations, some of them people who'd done nothing wrong but couldn't stomach the scrutiny. There were lawsuits, the criminal cases against Osgood and Ferris and Delia. Grinding forward, Ethan called to testify twice, sitting in a courtroom in a suit that Victoria's assistant had helped him buy because he didn't own one, describing to a jury how he'd found 2 boxes and run an engine to the edge of destruction to catch a man by his smile. Osgood took a plea. Ferris flipped and testified against Delia in exchange for a lighter sentence. Delia fought it to the end and lost, and the sentence the judge handed down made the industry news for a second time. Through all of it, Ethan built. Because that was the thing nobody had understood about him for 10 years. The thing that couldn't fit on a resume with a gap in it. Ethan Carter didn't just solve problems. He built systems that stopped problems from happening in the first place. He rebuilt Langford Motors' entire quality assurance process from the ground up, and the first thing he did, the very first thing, was find Marta. She was still in the same overlooked corner, still doing the real work, while men with better titles took the credit. Ethan walked into her workspace on his second week and pulled up a chair and said, "I'm rebuilding QA. I want you to run it." Marta had stared at him. "I'm 61 years old. I've been passed over for every promotion in this department for 20 years. They're not going to make me head of anything." "They're not making the call," Ethan said. "I am. And I watched you catch a saboteur by reading his face when 40 engineers with better degrees than both of us saw nothing. You've been the smartest person in this department for 26 years, and everybody was too busy looking at your coffee-stained badge to notice." He slid a folder across her desk. "It's yours if you want it. Double your salary, your own team, and a promise from me that as long as I'm in this building, the person who does the real work is the person who gets the credit for it." Marta had cried again. And then she'd taken the job, and within 3 months, her department caught more defects than it had in the previous 3 years combined, because Ethan had done the one thing nobody had ever done for her, which was to trust her judgment and get out of her way. He did the same for Danny, the 23-year-old who'd tackled a fleeing saboteur on the fanciest floor in the building, who'd been the only one listening that first morning. Ethan pulled him onto his own team and started teaching him everything, the way somebody should have taught Ethan when he was 23, the way nobody at Meridian ever had. "Why me?" Danny asked him once late, both of them still in the building past 10 working a problem. "Because that first morning when everybody in that room was laughing at me, you were the one who said I was right about the timing," Ethan said. "You didn't know me. I was a floor guy. And you spoke up anyway in front of your boss, in front of the CEO. And you said the floor guy's right and nobody told him. Do you know how rare that is? To watch a whole room decide something and to say no? Wait, the evidence says otherwise even when it costs you." He shook his head. "I spent 10 years invisible because people looked at my clothes instead of my work. You looked at my work. I'm never going to forget that." The engine went into production. The real one. The clean one, rebuilt from the master schematic with Ethan's own hands, and inspected under Marta's new process, twice, 3 times, no boxes, no lies, no rot. It performed exactly the way its architecture had always promised it would, the architecture built on ideas Ethan had helped invent a lifetime ago. When it passed its final high-load certification, the same test, the sabotage, had been designed to turn into a funeral. Victoria brought Ethan into the test cell to watch it, just the two of them, and they stood there and listened to it run at full power, flawless, furious, alive for a full 10 minutes with no one's thumb near any cutoff switch because there was nothing left to be afraid of. "We did it," Victoria said over the roar. "You did it," Ethan corrected her. "I just found the knife somebody stuck in it. You're the one who pulled it out and kept the patient alive." Halloran flew back for the launch. The public won the real unveiling a year almost to the day from the morning it had all nearly ended. He found Ethan in the crowd and pulled him aside. "You look different," Halloran said. "I own 2 suits now." "That's not what I mean." Halloran studied him. "A year ago you had a look. I told you about it. The look of a man portioning himself out, giving everything, taking nothing, embarrassed to want anything at all." He nodded slowly. "It's gone." Ethan considered that. "My daughter has braces now," he said, "and a college fund that's actually got money in it, and a father who's not tired all the time in the specific way that comes from being scared about rent." He watched the crowd, the engineers, Marta talking animatedly to a group of younger inspectors who clearly worshipped her, Danny presenting to a knot of investors like he'd been born to it. "And I built something. Not just the engine. Them. A place where the person who does the real work gets seen. That's the thing they took from me at Meridian. Not the job. The being seen. I've spent a year making sure nobody in this building goes through what I went through." He looked at Halloran. "Turns out that's the thing I was actually good at all along. Not engines. People. I just never got the chance to find out because I was too busy surviving." "You know," Halloran said, "when I made you part of the deal, I did it because I saw a wasted mind. A $9 billion engineer fixing floors. I thought I was rescuing an asset." He smiled. "I was wrong about what the asset was. It was never the engineering. Any good school turns out engineers. The asset was the 10 years, the floors, the surviving. It made you into the one thing money can't manufacture. It made you into a man who knows exactly what it costs to be invisible, and who will burn himself to the ground before he lets it happen to somebody else." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, the same gesture from a year ago in the same building to a very different man. "That's not an engineer's son. That's a leader. The floors made you. Don't ever be ashamed of them." 2 years after the morning of the chalk circles, Langford Motors was the most talked about company in the industry, and not because of the scandal which had faded, but because of what it had become after. It had a reputation now. A strange one for a company its size. It was known as the place where they told the truth. Where the numbers were real. where a junior engineer could stop a launch by raising a hand, and everybody would actually stop and listen. Where the person who found the problem got the credit, not the person with the biggest title. People wanted to work there. The best people. They took pay cuts to work there because in an industry full of meridians, full of places that would throw you away the moment your wife got sick, Langford Motors had become the one place that wouldn't. And in the east bay of the main hangar near the expansion joints that Ethan had been hired to repair that first morning, there were 3 faded chalk circles that nobody had ever cleaned off. They should have washed away years ago. But somebody in that first week had quietly clear-coated over them, sealed them into the floor, and nobody ever admitted to doing it, though Ethan always suspected Danny. And they became a thing. New employees on their first day got walked past them, and the person giving the tour would stop and point and tell the story. The single dad everybody mocked. The 7 minutes. The 2 boxes. The traitor caught by his own smile. The man the whole industry threw away, who turned out to be the only one who could see. They called it the 7-minute lesson. But Ethan never much liked that name because it made it sound like the lesson was about him, about how smart he'd been, and that had never been the point. The point was Victoria. The point was a woman who'd laughed at a man in dirty boots and then had the rarest kind of courage. There is the courage to stop laughing, to look again, to say out loud in front of everyone I was wrong. Most people never do that. Most people, when they realize they've misjudged someone, just quietly adjust and move on, and never admit the misjudgment out loud, because admitting it costs pride, and pride is the thing people protect above almost everything. Victoria had spent her pride to buy the truth. And that one act had saved her company because a woman willing to admit she was wrong about a floor contractor was a woman willing to admit her whole leadership team was rotten, and a woman willing to admit that was a woman who could rebuild. The engineers who told the story got that part wrong always. They made it about Ethan's genius. But Ethan knew the truth. His genius fixed the engine. Victoria's humility saved the company. And of the two, the humility was rarer and harder and worth more. He told her that once near the end of the second year in her office, late the building quiet around them. "You give me too much credit," she said. "You found everything. You caught everyone. You rebuilt half this company." "I found the problem," Ethan said. "You listened. Anybody can be smart. Being smart's cheap. This whole building's full of smart. You know how rare it is to be smart and able to hear that you were wrong? That's the miracle. That's the thing that doesn't grow on trees. I've met 100 smart people who'd rather let their whole company burn than admit a floor guy knew something they didn't." He looked at her. "You almost let it burn too. For about 3 hours that first morning, you were exactly like all of them. And then you weren't. And that's the whole story. Not the boxes, not the engine. The moment you stopped laughing." Victoria was quiet for a long time. "My father used to say something," she said finally. "The smartest guy in the room is almost never the guy who talks the most. I heard him say it 100 times growing up. And that first morning when you spoke up from the floor, that line was in my head and I ignored it. I laughed at you while my father's voice was telling me not to." She shook her head. "I think about that a lot. How close I came. How I almost lost everything, not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I was too proud to hear the smartest guy in the room, who happened to be on his knees, fixing my floor." "But you heard him," Ethan said. "Eventually. 7 minutes late, but you heard him. That's what counts." The last thing. Lily was 10 now, and she came to the office sometimes after school, and she'd sit in the corner of her dad's office doing homework while he worked, and the engineers all knew her, and Marta kept a jar of candy in her desk, specifically for the days Lily visited. She'd grown up watching her father go from tired and scared to something else. Something steadier. And she was old enough now to understand a version of what had happened. The story of the circles and the boxes, and the morning that changed everything. She asked him about it once. "Dad, were you sad when you were fixing floors before Langford?" And Ethan Carter thought about how to answer his daughter honestly, because he'd promised himself in the hardest years that he'd never lie to her, that whatever else the world took from them, she'd always get the truth from her father. "Yeah," he said. "I was sad. I was really sad for a long time. I used to be good at something, and the world decided it didn't want me anymore, and I believed it. That's the part that got me, baby. I believed them. For 10 years I woke up every morning, and I believed I was exactly what they'd decided I was. A floor guy. Nothing more. But you weren't. No, Ethan said. I wasn't. I was the same person the whole time. Same mind, same hands, same everything. The only thing that changed on the morning of the circles was that somebody finally stopped long enough to look. He pulled her close. And that's the thing I need you to understand, Lily, more than anything else I ever teach you. The world is going to try to tell you what you are. It's going to look at your clothes, or your job, or your money, or 100 things that aren't you at all, and it's going to decide. And most of the time, it's going to decide wrong. And you cannot make the mistake I made. You cannot believe them. Because the truth of what you are doesn't change based on who's looking. It's the same whether you're running a company or fixing a floor. You just have to hold on to it even when nobody else can see it until the day somebody finally does. Lily thought about that the way 10-year-olds do, seriously, with her whole face. Somebody saw you, she said. Miss Victoria saw you. She did, eventually. Ethan smiled. But here's the real secret, baby. The one nobody in the story ever gets. She didn't give me anything I didn't already have. She didn't make me smart, I was always smart. She didn't make me good at engines, I was always good at engines. All she did was stop laughing and look. That's all it ever takes. That's the whole thing. Somebody who stops laughing long enough to look. He kissed the top of her head. So you be that person, Lily, for other people. When everybody's laughing at somebody, you be the one who stops and looks. Because somewhere out there on their knees doing the job nobody respects, there's always somebody who could change everything if just one person would see them. The chalk circles are still there, sealed into the floor of the East Bay, and they will be there long after everyone who remembers that first morning is gone. New engineers still get walked past them. They still hear the story. And most of them think it's a story about a genius about 7 minutes about a maintenance contractor who turned out to be smarter than everyone in the room. But it was never about that. It was about a man who held on to the truth of himself through 10 years of being told he was nothing. And a woman who found the courage to admit she was wrong. And the simple world-changing power of looking at a person, really looking before you decide who they are. Ethan Carter was never a floor guy who got lucky. He was exactly who he always was on the day he had 4 patents and a team of 30, and on the day he had $42 and a hard heel of bread in his lunch, and on the day he walked into a hangar to fix some cracks and walked out with his whole life back. The same man, the whole time. The circles didn't fix the engine, Ethan did. And the lesson was never 7 minutes long. The lesson takes a lifetime. And it is this: never let the world decide what a person is worth by looking at their hands instead of their mind, their clothes instead of their character, their lowest moment instead of their whole. Because the person everyone overlooks, the one on their knees doing the work nobody wants, is so often the only one who can save you. You just have to stop laughing long enough to see them.